Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Crazy Guy in the Forest, submitted by Jen Paulette. I've been hunting with my family since I was about 10 years old. Bow and shotgun. My dad let me always miss school for opening days, and that remains a tradition. We had permission to hunt on some property about an hour away from us, and it was rare that we came home empty-handed any year. There was a swath of open space between this posted land and other posted land owned by an older gentleman. He gave us permission to be out there as well on his land, but if he wasn't out hunting, we never went over. My dad was very strict about making sure people knew we were out there. It was a respect thing. Oftentimes, I would have my stand right at that long strip of land as the deer liked to walk up and down it in the early mornings. About 100 yards away was my brother and his stand usually. This particular year, we were in our favorite spots playing the waiting game, when I heard a voice yell out, "Get off my effing land!" I looked around and didn't see anyone, but a minute later he yelled the same thing again. My brother and I had little walkie-talkies, and I quietly got in touch with him and asked if he heard what I did. He said yeah, and that whoever it was being a jerk and ruining our hunt. He didn't see anyone either, and after a fruitless morning, I got down and walked around to see if I could see who it was, if they were still out there. I didn't see any signs of anyone being there, and no one called out for the rest of the time we were there. But the next day, it happened again. Same voice, same message, about the same time of day. This time I yelled back saying, "What the heck are you talking about? We have permission to be here." Everything got real quiet, and then the tree I was in literally exploded right above my head. Somebody had shot at me. I yelled and practically jumped to the ground, scared as all get out. I yelled for my brother, and then I heard the voice yell again, "Get the F out of here!" Not wanting a second round coming my way, I ran to my brother, and we both went to find my dad and uncle. I told them what had happened. My dad is a no-nonsense guy and said we were going back to the cabin we were staying at. He left us there and then drove up the road to get a cell signal and called the state police. And there happened to be a car not too far from us checking tags. The guy came out to the cabin, and I told him what had been going on, and then took him to the spot where I'd been shot at. I was positive it had come from the property on the other side of the swath, and he said he was going to look into it closer. I was very shaken up, and my dad thought it would be best for me to stay in the cabin and just calm down, and that's what I did. A little while later, the trooper came back and said he'd been out to the little trailer that the guy from the property over the ways stayed in when he was out there. No one was there, but the trooper said someone had been there recently for sure. He made some phone calls of his own and found out that the man who owned the property was not in town, and no one had permission to be out there, although he said that we could feel free to be there if we wanted to. He had no idea what was going on. Later that day, the trooper went back to the trailer, and he caught a guy. The property owner's estranged cousin who was suffering from some serious mental issues. He was not wearing a shirt or jacket or shoes, and this is the northeast part of the country in the fall. I mean, it's really cold. He had a rifle, and it was pretty easy to figure out that he was the one yelling and shooting. He was arrested and taken away, and we found out later he was put into a facility to get help. I was angry at first, but after a time I kind of felt bad for the guy. I mean, he was really messed up. He certainly could have killed me, but I don't think he was that crazy. He was just trying to scare me. The man who owns that property is dead now, and the land is owned by his son, and we have it in writing that we can be out there to hunt, camp, or fish whenever we wanted. Just goes to show you how dangerous things can get when someone is not well in the head and has a firearm. What Was That? By Jonas B. My family's always been a hunting family. I didn't get into it until I was a little bit older, but when I did, I fell in love with it. I know a lot of people don't like hunting or hunters, but we were the kind of family that shared the wealth with everyone in our neighborhood, especially those folks who didn't have as much as we did. If we, meaning me and my 4 brothers, my father and uncles, all got does or bucks, We donated food to the local pantries for anyone who needed anything. And that has nothing to do with my story. But what I wanted to tell everyone was about the time I went to our family's cabin with just me, my father, my Uncle Ray, and my brother Stephen. It was a snowy day on this occasion, and we went out pretty early to make sure we got to our tree stands before first light. We got all our gear together, made sure we were all wearing warm stuff, and headed out. It's being still dark, we were all wearing headlamps, and one by one we each went to our individual stands. We weren't bunched up, we were pretty spread apart. So, just as it started to get light out, you know when the snow makes everything a little bit brighter when the sun starts to come up? Well, the sun wasn't up yet, but the sky was lighting up, and you could tell that it would be much brighter shortly. And that's when I heard it. This deep, deep howl like a growl. I mean, that's really the best way I could describe it. It was a mix of both. It was very low-toned and drawn out. I've heard plenty of animals out in the wilderness. Wolves, coyotes, elk, deer, you name it. This was nothing like that. And added to the fact that whatever was making the noise would do it like every 15 or 20 seconds, and it was getting louder, like it was getting closer to me. My family members didn't have any other ways of communicating with each other than cell phones, so immediately everyone started texting in a group message. It was all a bunch of, "Did you hear that?" or "What the hell was that?" Even my father and uncle, who were very seasoned hunters, were saying how strange everything was. The howls were getting louder, but only because it was getting closer, of that I'm sure. But then, in the dim light about 200 yards away at a tree line that was open to my stand, I saw a large, upright animal, for lack of a better term. It looked and moved like a man, but it was not a guy. I couldn't tell if it was covered with hair or what, but that's just because of the distance. Finally, I got out my spotting scope and got a clearer look. Of course, I read about Bigfoot and other monsters when I was a kid, but having grown up as a camper, hiker, and later, obviously, a hunter, I didn't really put much stock into any of that stuff. I mean, it just wasn't possible in my mind. But now, here I was looking at this thing walking across a field towards me from the tree line, and I immediately began texting everyone saying, "I don't know what this is, you guys. Can you see this?" No one else had the view that I did, and I tried to describe what I was seeing. For a few minutes, no one responded until my dad texted, "Are you sure it's not just somebody in a ghillie suit?" I kept looking through my spotting scope and said, "There's no way that this is a guy just dressed up." Right then, the howl came even louder, and this creature, or whatever it was, began running towards me. It got about halfway through the field and then stopped, put both arms up, and again I could see it was not a human being in any kind of costume or suit. It let out another really loud bellow, stood there looking in my direction, and then started moving towards the tree line off to its left and my right. It was going in the direction of where my brother and uncle were, and it kept making these little howls, and everyone heard it and was still texting about it. But no one else saw it after it went back into the trees, and we didn't hear it anymore. No one got a deer that morning, and when we all went back to the cabin to rest as a group, that's all we talked about. I tried taking a picture of it with my iPhone, but it was just far enough away that it just looked like a dark shape in the middle of the field. We couldn't make out any details, and sadly, said phone fell out of my pocket while fishing one day. After I got out of the water, it was pretty much shot, and I didn't have anything stored in the cloud. I don't know what that thing was. I mean, perhaps it was Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. But it was the only time we saw it out there, and the only instance where anyone in that area had ever talked about seeing anything like that. Of course, we asked all of our friends and people who also hunted or lived out in that area that we knew. But again, nobody had ever heard anything about it. I'm sure a lot of them thought we were crazy, which I don't blame them. But I know what I saw, and my family knows what they heard. I reached out to a local group that is into this sort of thing, the whole ghost hunt and monster hunt thing. One of them actually told me that they believed Bigfoot can be a migratory species, and perhaps what we saw was just one of them on his way to somewhere else. Maybe it recognized that we were there and was giving us a warning, or maybe just asking to clear a path. I don't know, I'm not an expert in Bigfoot. But it was just a theory. I mean, who knows? We still have our cabin, we still go hunting as much as we can, but we've never had a visit like that ever again. In a way, I really wish we would, because I would like to have more answers. And despite us searching and spending a lot of time out there looking for footprints or whatever, we've never found anything. We even let the group go out to do what they referred to as expeditions, but they never came up with anything either. I wonder what that thing was out there. And if it really was Bigfoot, and I'm one of the lucky people to have seen one in their lifetime, I guess that's pretty cool. Scary, but cool. Strangers Hunting, submitted by Pete Best. Not that Pete Best. When I was 15 in the fall of 1989, I was hunting with my dad and his friends. I'll call John and Sam for anonymity. This took place outside of a place called Friendship, New York, and I'm willing to bet you know where that is, Uncle Jay. We set out that morning all ready to go, like any opening day. We'd been preparing for the past weeks, and to finally get out there was a rush. It was an area where a lot of guys parked and hung out during the day as kind of a break place. Someone, I don't know who, had brought 2 50-gallon drums that we used for fires. I mean, sure, we look like a bunch of bums standing around them, but if you hunt, you know the camaraderie that goes along with it, and little things like that don't matter. Everybody usually brought propane stoves and made coffee and stuff like that, and we all just shared everything with anybody who showed up. Well, that opening day after an unsuccessful morning, we were hanging out eating and talking about our bad luck, when a guy we had never seen before came stumbling over to us. He was holding his stomach and his jacket was covered with blood. We could barely make out what he was saying, and there was blood coming from his mouth, too. It was no mystery to any of us that he had been shot. My dad's friend Sam got up and put his arm around the guy and asked him what happened, and he stammered out that he had shot himself by accident, and that he really needed help. Well, this was 1989. Nobody had cell phones. So somebody said they would take him to a hospital over in Wellsville. 2 guys helped him into their truck, and they took off. I remember everyone talking about how odd it was that he'd shot himself in the stomach. I mean, we all had pistols for kill shots if necessary, but that was super rare. Then again, accidents happen. We didn't stop chatting about the guy, though. About 15 minutes later, another guy came walking into our area with a shotgun in his hands. He said his name was Scott something or other and was cheerily asking about our morning. He said he hadn't had any luck either and heard us talking, so he thought he'd stop over and say hello. After a cup of coffee and some small talk, we found out that he was from Pennsylvania and was trying his luck on this side of the border. The look on my dad's face told me something was amiss, and both Sam and John shared the same look. This guy did have a Ruger on his hip, and it must have clicked to them, certainly not me, that the other guy didn't have any firearms at all. I don't know about anywhere else, but in New York, all shooting injuries are reported when you go to the hospital. In the back of our minds, I think we were all waiting for the authorities to show up asking some questions, but nothing had happened yet. The guy kept talking real fast, and some of what he was saying didn't make any sense. When someone asked him how much his out-of-state license cost, he said some crazy number, and the way he kept looking around made us nervous. My dad leaned over to John and whispered something, and John nodded. The guy finished his coffee and said he was going to go back out and wished us all luck. John asked him where he was headed, a loaded question, and the guy said back where he'd come from, a little ways down the road and on the south side of it. He left, and the conversation turned quickly, mainly started by my dad and John. Sam offered to run into town and did so. I mean, they all knew something was wrong. I was too young or too dumb or not paying attention to notice anything at the time other than dealing with the shock of seeing a guy who had just been shot. About 20 minutes later, Sam came back with 2 state troopers who started asking questions. One of them noticed I looked a little shaken up and gave me a state police pin that I still have to this day. But anyway, the story. They radioed some other forces, and pretty soon there were guys from the Allegheny Sheriff's and the Wellsville Police Department combing the woods for the guy that had stopped by our area. They found him and questioned him about the shooting of the other guy, and I guess he screwed up his story so much that he finally got caught in a lie, and they arrested him. He was from Pennsylvania. He did not have a license to hunt, was carrying an illegal sidearm, and had indeed shot the other guy. I guess they were in some kind of lover's quarrel. They were both gay, and not that it mattered, but back then things were a little different for our fellow men. The guy got really mad at his lover, and then tricked him to take him out hunting in an attempt to kill him and make it look like an accident. He purposely came over the border in order to sneak back home with plausible deniability. When my dad whispered to John he was talking about the Ruger on the guy's hip and knew how that was so not legal, he put two and two together. I do remember that while the guy was talking to us and when anyone asked him questions, he would tap the Ruger and look at me. I don't know why. Maybe he was thinking he could use me as a shield or something if something went wrong. Or maybe that's just a silly thought I've kept in my brain. I've talked to my dad about it, and he said I wasn't crazy for thinking that after the fact. At the end of the day, the guy survived, and the guy who shot him went to jail. And it was the first year none of us got to use our tags. I mean, what a rotten hunting season all around. Thanks for reading this if you do. Ghost at the Cabin, submitted by Run DMT. My family has a long tradition of hunting and camping and all things outdoors. Back in the early 90s, my grandfather retired and decided to build a proper cabin on some land in North Carolina. Previously, there was an old camper parked out there that we used, but he wanted to do something special for the family. It was pretty sweet, more of a house than a cabin. It had 3 bedrooms, including a bunkhouse area for us kids. We would go out there all year round for vacation, hunting and fishing. There was no one else for miles around, and while we did see people around on the public land, our spot was just for us. This story is about one season when my family went out there. My mom, dad, sister, brother, and grandparents. Whenever we did this, it was a true treat. My Nana and Mom were not into hunting, so they busied themselves all day making food for us, and after a cold day of hunting, it was awesome to go inside and have a bowl of chili or whatever else they had put together. One night, everyone was just sitting around and talking while the wood stove was keeping us all snug. There was a knock at the door, so my dad got up to see who was there, and when he opened it, we all kind of looked over. I mean, it was 9 o'clock at night, and this was the middle of nowhere. But when he did open up, there was nobody there, and we all heard the knocking. My dad shrugged and said something about there must have been a raccoon or something trying to get in. We forgot it, and my brother and sister and I cleaned our guns and then started playing Crazy Eights on the rug in the middle of the main room. The knock came again, and we all looked up at the same time. Once again, my dad went to the door, and there was no one out there. And once again, we all shrugged it off. It wasn't until we were all in bed that things took a darker turn. From our bunks, we could hear a tapping at the window next to the door. My dad actually yelled out, "Knock it off, you guys, go to sleep." He was in one of the bedrooms next to my grandparents' room. I whispered, "It wasn't us." There was still that tapping at the window. Out came Dad in his pajamas and went to the door and flung it open. There was nobody outside, just like before. He closed the door, and the tapping started immediately as he turned his back to it. He just stood there looking at us, and then turned around back to the door. He opened it again, and then just stood staring outside until quietly we heard him say, "Holy Mary, Mother of God." My brother asked what was going on, and my dad just said go to sleep and closed the door. He went into the bedroom, and we could hear him talking to my mom in a quiet voice. And a few minutes later, he came back out and told us to ignore any sounds and to get some sleep so we could be up early for the hunt. Me, being the oldest and most defiant of my siblings, was determined to see who or what it was, or whatever it was that my dad obviously saw. But we all fell asleep before anything could happen again. But, that is, until I woke up to the tapping in the middle of the night. It was around 2, and I was determined to see what was going on out there. So I got up as quietly as I could and went over to the window. The tapping stopped. I moved to the door and opened it up. And there, at the edge of where we stopped trimming the grass, was a dark figure. I couldn't see any features, but it was definitely a man. He didn't say anything. He just stood there looking at the cabin. Finally, he just sort of faded away, but I convinced myself whoever it was out there had just walked off into the field. I went back to my bunk and got to sleep. The next morning we all went out early, and I got a doe, but I didn't say anything to my dad about what I had seen. We were leaving that day, so I was happy about my deer, But on the way back, I was riding with my dad and grandfather with the 2 deer we had bagged in the truck bed. For whatever reason, that's when I brought it up. My dad said, "I thought I told you to go to sleep." And then he laughed and said he saw the same person I did. Now was my grandfather's time to step in on this. "That was my dad out there, your great-grandfather that you saw," he said, and my dad looked at him surprised. My great-grandfather had died when my dad was really little, and we never really talked about him. "I know we always told you that your papa died in his sleep, but the truth is he took his own life right out here near where the cabin is. I knew at the time he was struggling with a lot of things, but one day he just came out here by himself and did what he did." He looked out the window of the truck and didn't say any more, and my dad didn't say anything either. The last thing he said about it after a few minutes was, "I thought I was the only one who would see him, but I guess I now know better." I've been going to that cabin since then, and my grandparents are both gone as well, but I've never seen that figure again, and neither has my dad. At least he doesn't say anything if he does. I wonder if showing up when we were all out there as a family was a way of my great-grandfather saying goodbye. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a scary story you would like to hear narrated on my channel, email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. And if you have any scary Christmas or New Year's stories, I would love to have those. Again, email the same place. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below, and I will get back to you as quick as I can. And of course, follow me on social media. All the links for that are in the description below. If you'd like to take it a step further and support this channel and keep it ad-free, find me on Patreon. There's also a link down there for that. Everyone, be excellent to each other. We're living in scary times, and the best we can do is wear a mask, wash your hands, social distance. Until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.